But Scotland and UK currently enjoy the luxury of being able to import and export food to meet consumer preferences around the world. We should assume that this will always be possible, because as we can see from the worldwide geopolitics, and we in future there might be a greater volatility and shocks to the global food system. Scotland fishing industry is an integral part of our national food security. What will your party do to make sure that Scotland can continue to efficiently produce healthy, sustainable and renewable food from our seas for the long term?
Erin, I don't know if you want to maybe kick off with that.
Well, sure. I mean, one of the things I did want to bring into the conversation, I'm going to read it off my phone just so I get it right. And I think it's something that happened in January and we maybe all overlooked, which is that the UK government published the Nature Security Assessment on Global Biodiversity Loss, Ecosystems Collapse and National Security. So that was published in January 2026. And it went on to talk about how the global collapse of biodiversity, so globally, but also within Scotland, is going to impact our primarily it was a food security issue, but many other things. So I think that we really all need to be sitting up and thinking, how are we going to be a resilient Scotland? How are we going to feed people in Scotland? And wild, sustainable fisheries is going to be a key part of how we do that. I do think that, again, we are a coastal nation. We need to be funding our coastal communities, our coastal industries, and fishing is one of those key sectors. We need to be adequately funding that. And I didn't get to come in on that science question, but I think we need not only government science, but we need independent scientists. And I think we saw that with the work around the Clyde cod issue, that it was independent scientists that helped us understand that the regulations that we were working with weren't working. But I think one place that we could all work together on is the Good Food Nation Act that we have. So that's going to require local authorities are going to now imminently be starting to make their good food plans, their local plans. So the fishing sector and policymakers need to be talking together, so at a local level with councils, about where they're going to procure their local food. And fishing needs to be part of that, needs to be an integral part. So that legislation, that good food plan, requires more local procurement of food. And that's because in the face of the climate and nature emergency is one part of it, but it is all about local resilience as well. So, and it is also about, it's about local authorities looking at where do they source the food for their what they call public kitchens, which I find to be a bit of an opaque expression, but it basically means the food that is in schools, hospitals, prisons, anywhere that's a publicly run kitchen. There should be fish that is harvested in Scotland's waters in those places, so that people in primary schools are eating Scottish harvested fish, and people who are trying to recover in hospital are getting a good source of sustainable protein. So I think that's one bit of it. Another piece for me, which may seem maybe tangential, but I think there's been some interesting work around electric vessels, only for creelers. And that's happened as an initiative in Argyll, where a fisher, a creeler, converted his creel to electricity. And he can't go miles, and it works for creels because it's not dragging along towing gear. And he's had a very, very, very successful results with that. And I would love to see more government incentive to support fishers to move towards electrification of their vessels. So that would be inshore and creeling, so nothing that needs that power of a fossil fuel driven engine. So some of that kind of conversion also, so that we're not relying on the fossil fuel, because as we know, we've got a problem here now with the US-Israel war going on, and that's seen fuel shocks happening. So we need to find these ways to get ourselves more food secure and join up the legislation that's working for us to bring the supply chains into a more local place.
I mean, I know that also on land, this is a bit of a question, but with combining sort of more sustainable practices, there's just can sometimes be concern over the quantities that come out of that. I mean, can you reassure that what you're suggesting is kind of going to still support the food security.
You're talking about the electric vessel?
No, just generally kind of with, supporting more sustainable fishing practices. Sometimes there's worry about, the quantities and...
Well, I mean, I think the challenge is that there's something that is difficult for us all to face is the biodiversity collapse and the climate collapse, and that's why we're having to do things like move to renewable energy. So it's difficult to talk about one thing in isolation, but we do need to recognise what I talked about at the beginning, that the joint security report on the global biodiversity collapse is going to bring about problems with local food. So we need to get local supply chains in place because our fisheries is not just about feeding people in Scotland, it is about export. But we need to recognise how are we going to feed people in Scotland. And so there's some looking at global local supply chains, and I do think that the Good Food Nation work is an avenue in for that, for the sector to be looking at.
Anyone else want to jump in on food security? Yeah.
I'm happy to, and it's something that I've done a fair amount of work this Parliament. I was trying to bring forward a right to food bill, so that people would have access to good local food. That didn't happen for a variety of reasons I won't bore you with. But our food industry has to do, I guess, two things, and it does do two things. I mean, exports do add to the Scottish economy, and we can't get away from that. But at the same time, it's a bit galling when we go abroad and we see really good Scottish fish being sold, fish that doesn't come near our markets at home. So we have to encourage more eating of fish, and different fish as well, because we tend to eat kind of cod and haddock and nothing else. And with climate change, the fish we'll catch will be different. So I think we have to do a lot more about that. And we also have to avoid importing so much, because, and this not maybe so much for fishing, but certainly with farming, when we're looking at cutting the number of animals we rear, that is counterproductive, because we then import more intensively reared. So we've got control over what we produce ourselves, and we can do it in a more sustainable way, and therefore we should use more of what we produce rather than importing things that we have no control over at all. And I think your kind of further question to that about kind of more selective gear, things like that, yes, of course it cuts the amount you land, but it does encourage you to land and help you to land the more premium product rather than a lot of bycatch. And we're at the cutting edge of some of that work, and we don't really take much notice of what is happening. And the more selective we can be when fishing, obviously the better the profit for the fisher, but the less bycatch that is going to waste. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if there is bycatch, we should be landing it, we should be using it, we certainly shouldn't be wasting it.
So food security and the global food system is something that I've done a lot of work on in the last 4 years, maybe a wee bit more. I'm also a member of the Health Committee, so we've been looking at issues of tackling poverty, health inequalities, supporting short supply chains, better access to food in general, and that to me would include getting younger people eating fish, right from an early age to, and the whole issue, like some of the work that I've done is looking at working with Professor Stuart Gillespie, who has real concerns about the global food system, which is really, really complicated. So if we can support more local food production, whether it's onshore or offshore, and then local supply chains, short supply chains, all of that to help make sure we have more security here. That's what I would support. That's what I would encourage. I know that the Good Food Nation plan, the climate change plan, again I'm mentioning that, and our population health framework all will work together to support making sure we've got access to like high quality protein source which includes fish, for everybody in Scotland. So that's something that I think people are a bit more aware of now. And again, that, you know, when global shocks happen, it kind of brings it back into, you know, a more closer ability to frame it, and then people say, oh right, I realise that's what's happening. But we've seen such an increase in the cost of food. You know, I know people that are really struggling right now, and so if we can support local supply chains and sourcing locally, it's what we need to do to help support, you know, getting everybody access to fish.
What will you do that's different to now? Because obviously we're in this situation because of how things are being run. So what will those changes look like in order to make that change happen?
So there's already, like, you know, there's already conversations and changes and looking at processes. We're more aware of the need for short supply chains, encouraging supermarkets to shop local. There's advertisements of local product in the supermarkets, for instance. You know, there's willingness of local, like one of the examples is Aldi in Dumfries has local burgers from local cattle, for instance, and that's something that making people aware of where their food comes from is really, really important. And as we have this Good Food Nation plan, and it is a way that we can expose people to, you know, the supply chains and where food is coming from, and focus on that as well. So
also, do you think supermarkets can often they can even make up their own farms, can't they? Sometimes you have to be very, very sure to be in touch with them to.
Well, yeah,
make sure
I mean,
it is
the
genuinely
supermarkets
local produce, genuinely.
Yeah, they're really powerful in what they decide to promote and push forward and everything. But we've got real good local markets across Dumfries and Galloway, and we see people are seeking more local and seeking to support their local producers. Mm-hmm. So that's there has been a shift, I think, and that's something that we can continue to focus on.
Okay. Yeah, I guess mindset, but obviously actual action and
yeah, I mean, there is a real challenge of like supporting people out of poverty, people making choices. Sometimes they will just go for what is will accommodate them and their family in their economic ability. So we have to do what we can to support all of that, and making the shorter supply chains, making fish product, you know, part of that diet that people are seeking, because it's because we're competing in all of these issues right now. Mm. It's complex.
One of the issues around poverty and people obviously wanting to or having to access the cheapest possible quality food. I go back to more years ago than I care to remember when I spent a summer in a local fish factory actually packing white fish, which were in blocks which were blast frozen and used for fish fingers. But so I would be hopeful, I am hopeful, ever the optimist, that the Good Food Nation plan will be able to bring forward young people's understanding of where actually fish comes from and actually eating the fresh product. One of the main things I would do in terms of food security and ensuring that we have open markets is not to close the border between Scotland and England.
Just reflecting for I don't think there's anything that anybody can disagree with. So it's all very noble, these policies. But however, we've got the Green Party in particular and the SNP that rather than delivering policies that enable fishing, the policies that we see them promoting are policies that actually restrict fishing, which is completely the wrong way around. So it's all very well talking about how they support the industry, but we need to be looking at enabling fishing. And that's a way, and that's through sustainable fishes, whatever. And again, coming back to the statistics, I managed to say that word, that are published this morning, you know, 98% say food security is important, and of those people, 87 say that Scottish produced food is important as Scottish produced energy. That needs to be reflected and the policies of the new government. So we need to have a government that is focused on guaranteeing long-term sustainable access to the broadest fishing grounds as possible. We need the new Cabinet Secretary to commit that fishing will take a priority when it comes to the National Marine Plan. At the moment it's not. It's about renewables. It's about other activities in the seas. Yeah, we absolutely need to see change, we touched on it earlier, and supporting and innovation on modern vessels, and sadly, as a result of the disjointed working between the UK and the Scottish Government, we see that now that only 8% of the funding that's come through the Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund has come to Scotland. It should be closer to 60%. That will curtail some of the work we need to modernise our vessels and processes. I know I've been working with David Gilchrist here about training. It's incredibly important to get young people into training. At the moment, there's a real barrier in schools to get fishermen in, the fishing industry, whether that's processors or people who are actually working the boat in, to show that there's a fantastic career. You look around the room, all these banners with people's faces on, showing that the fantastic career, the career progression they can get. So that's really important we invest in that. An onshore processing, we need to add value to the product. And I do believe, I represent the area where Kukubria is, and we see a lot of our scallops put on a lorry and transported to France, and that's incredibly important. But I would like to see more onshore processing that adds value and then gets into the Scottish food chain. But we absolutely need policies from this government at the moment, or the new government, that enables sustainable fishing, rather than what we're seeing now and what we've seen for the last 19 years as restrictions on fishing. So we need to turn the whole thing round.